For 33 years, I was the family footnote. I was the lucky one they took in. The charity case my sister tolerated in public and erased in private. I thought I knew my place until the day my parents died and the locks on the house were changed. That was when I found the 25-year-old trust document they buried deep. The one that didn't use my last name but somehow knew exactly who owned it all. The invitation to the Sunday dinner had been formal, delivered via a text message from my sister, Elena, rather than a phone call. That was the first sign. In most families, a Sunday dinner is a given, a messy, chaotic rhythm of life. In the Long family, it was a summons. I arrived at the house I had grown up in, the sprawling colonial on the edge of the wealthy district, and felt that familiar tightening in my chest. It was the feeling of being a guest in a hotel where you have overstayed your welcome. I was 33 years old. I had a job, an apartment, and a life, but the moment I crossed that threshold, I shrank. I became Sadie the project, Sadie the afterthought. The dining room was set with the good china, the porcelain with the gold rim that my mother usually reserved for the mayor or the bishop. Tonight, it was just us, my mother, my father, Elena, her husband Mark, and me. And of course, the elephant in the room that had been sitting in the corner for 3 decades. We were halfway through the roast chicken when the comment landed. It was subtle, practiced, the kind of insult that leaves no bruise but breaks the bone. My father was talking about the economy, about how hard it was for young people to buy homes. He gestured toward Elena. You and Mark are doing well. Of course, you made smart choices. Then he looked at me. His gaze was softer, pitiable. And Sadie, well, you have always had a different path. You are lucky we took you in when we did. God knows where you would be if we hadn't. The table went quiet. The clinking of silverware stopped. I looked down at my plate. I was not adopted in the traditional sense. I was their daughter, or so my birth certificate said, but there had always been a narrative, a story woven into the family tapestry that I was somehow rescued, that I was less of them and more by the grace of them. I am grateful. I said, my voice steady, I always am. Elena took a sip of her wine, her eyes glittering over the rim of the glass. She set it down with a sharp click. Oh, Sadie, don't be so dramatic. Dad just means you require a little more overhead. You are like a historic building, charming, but expensive to maintain. She laughed. Mark laughed because Elena laughed. My mother just stared at her centerpiece, her fingers twisting the linen napkin in her lap. Later, while the men were in the den and my mother was clearing the table, Elena cornered me in the hallway. The performance of the grieving, burdened sister dropped instantly. Her face went hard, the lines around her mouth tightening. I need you to look at the tax filings for the lake property, she said, shoving a manila folder into my chest. The accountant is an idiot. You are good at details. Fix it. I took the folder. It was heavy. You could ask me nicely, I said. Or you could pay a professional. Elena scoffed. Why should I pay a professional when I have you? It is the least you can do. Sadie, considering everything Mom and Dad have done for you, you are practically their charity case. It is time you started paying back the investment. She walked away before I could respond, her heels clicking on the hardwood like gunfire. That was the dynamic. I was the charity case when they wanted to feel superior. But I was the indispensable clerk when there was work to be done. They used my competence to run their lives while denying I had any right to belong in them. I went into the kitchen to help my mother. She was standing by the sink, looking out the window into the dark backyard. The water was running, overflowing a bowl of soaking dishes. But she didn't seem to notice. Mom, I said. She jumped, turning to face me. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and wet. She looked terrified. It was an expression I had never seen on her before. My mother was a woman of steel and etiquette. Fear was not in her repertoire. Sadie, she whispered. She reached out and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her fingernails digging into my skin. What is it? I asked. Is it Dad? Is he sick? No, she said, shaking her head rapidly. Listen to me. If anything happens to us, do not sign anything Elena brings you. Do not sign anything. Promise me." The urgency in her voice chilled me. My mother and Elena were a team. They were the long women, the socialites, the queens of the board. For her to warn me against my sister was like the moon warning me against the tide. "Why would I sign anything?" I asked. "Mom, you are scaring me. Promise me," she hissed, her eyes darting toward the doorway to ensure we were alone. "I promise," I said. She released my wrist and turned back to the sink, plunging her hands into the hot water. We never spoke of it again. We finished the dishes in silence, the only sound the clatter of porcelain and the hum of the refrigerator. When I left that night, I hugged her. She felt frail, like a bird made of hollow bones. 3 days later, my phone rang at midnight. It is a sound that splits your life into 2 parts, the before and the after. I woke up from a deep sleep, my heart hammering against my ribs before I even registered the noise. I fumbled for the phone on the nightstand. The screen was bright in the dark room. It was Elena. "They are gone," she said. Her voice was flat. No tears, no hysteria, just a cold statement of fact. "What?" I asked, my brain refusing to parse the words. "Mom and Dad," she said. "There was an accident on the county road. A deer, or ice. The police are not sure yet. The car went off the embankment. They are gone." "Sadie," the world stopped. The silence in the room became a physical weight, pressing down on my chest. I tried to breathe, but the air felt thin. "Where are you?" I asked. "I am at the hospital," she said. "But there is no point in you coming. They are taking them to the morgue. I have already called the funeral home. Go back to sleep. Sadie, we will deal with the logistics in the morning." She hung up. "Go back to sleep." I sat on the edge of my bed, the phone still in my hand, staring at the wall. Grief hit me like a physical blow, a wave of nausea and sorrow that doubled me over. But underneath the grief, running like a cold current beneath the ice, was panic. "There is no point in you coming. We will deal with the logistics." I was already being managed. I was already being pushed to the perimeter. My parents were dead, and before their bodies were even cold. My sister had drawn a line in the sand. She was on the inside. I was on the out. The funeral was a spectacle. It was held at the cathedral, a massive, cavernous space filled with the city's elite. There were politicians, business tycoons, and people I had never seen before, all dressed in black wool and expensive perfume. I arrived early, wanting to see them one last time before the casket was closed. But the funeral director, a man with a face like a crumpled napkin, stopped me at the door. "Ms. Long," he said, nodding to someone behind me. "Elena, your sister thought it best to keep the caskets closed, to remember them as they were." I looked at Elena. She was standing by the altar, directing the florists. She didn't look at me. I stood in the vestibule, feeling useless. Relatives started to arrive. Aunts and uncles I hadn't seen in years. Cousins who looked through me as if I were made of glass. "Sadie," Aunt Martha said, thrusting a stack of programs into my hands. "Thank goodness you are here. Can you handle this? The ushers are running late. Make sure the VIPs are in the first 3 rows." I became staff, while Elena accepted condolences and wept elegantly into a lace handkerchief. I showed people to their seats. I organized the flower arrangements. I ran to the car to get my uncle's forgotten inhaler. I was the logistics girl, the details girl. During the service, I sat in the second row. The first row was for Elena, Mark, and my parents' siblings. There was a space next to Elena, empty, but when I moved toward it, she placed her purse on the cushion. "For the governor," she whispered, not making eye contact. I sat behind her, staring at the back of her perfectly coiffed head. I listened to the eulogies. People spoke about my father's business acumen, my mother's charity work. They spoke of their legacy. They spoke of their beloved daughter, Elena. I was mentioned once. "And their devoted Sadie," the priest said. It sounded like he was talking about a golden retriever. After the service, We stood outside on the stone steps. The air was crisp, smelling of rain and asphalt. A man approached me. He was tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than my car. I recognized him vaguely. Mr. Henderson, a family friend, a fixer, the kind of man who existed in the gray areas of my father's business dealings. Sadie, he said. He didn't offer his hand. He slid a white envelope into my palm, a condolence card. Thank you, Mr. Henderson, I said. He leaned in close. He smelled of scotch and peppermint. Your parents were good people, he said. He spoke too quickly, his eyes scanning the crowd over my shoulder. Don't worry about the future. Sadie, your parents took care of everything years ago. Everything is settled. You don't need to worry your pretty head about complex things. It didn't feel like comfort. It felt like a command. Stay in your lane. Don't ask questions. He patted my shoulder, 2 hard, dismissive taps, and disappeared into the crowd. I put the envelope in my pocket. My hands were shaking. I needed to get away. I needed to breathe. I walked around the side of the cathedral, toward the small garden where the smokers were gathering. I heard voices around the corner. Hushed, urgent whispers. We have to move fast, a man said. Uncle Robert, I know, Elena's voice replied. The sharpness was back. I have already called the locksmith. We need to secure the files before the lawyers get involved. What about Sadie? Robert asked. Elena laughed. It was a short, bitter sound. We will keep Sadie distracted. She is emotional. She breaks easily. She doesn't need to be involved in the heavy lifting. I will give her some busy work. Let her sort through Mom's clothes. That will keep her occupied for weeks. I froze. I pressed my back against the cold stone of the church wall. She breaks easily. The grief that had been drowning me suddenly receded, replaced by a sharp, crystalline clarity. They weren't just excluding me because they didn't respect me. They were excluding me because they were hiding something. They were strategizing. You don't secure files and change locks unless there is something you don't want found. I didn't confront them. I didn't scream. I walked back to my car, got in, and drove. I drove straight to my parents' house. I pulled into the driveway. The house looked the same as it had on Sunday. The curtains were drawn. The porch light was off. I walked up the steps, my key in my hand. It was the key I had carried since high school. I slid it into the lock. It didn't turn. I jiggled it. I pulled it out and tried again. Nothing. The lock was new. The brass was shiny, unweathered. My sister hadn't waited until the funeral was over. She hadn't even waited until the bodies were buried. She had changed the locks while I was handing out programs. A car pulled into the driveway behind me. It was Elena. She got out, wearing black sunglasses, looking every inch the grieving heiress. Sadie? She called out. What are you doing here? My key doesn't work, I said. I kept my voice calm. I didn't let her see my hands shaking. Oh, she said, walking up the steps. I forgot to tell you. I had the locks changed this morning. For safety. You know how people are. They read the obituaries and target empty houses. I didn't want looters. Looters, I repeated. She reached into her purse and pulled out a single silver key. Here, she said, dropping it into my hand. A spare. For you. Thank you, I said. I waited until she unlocked the door and went inside. Then, standing alone on the porch, I tried the key she had given me. It slid into the lock. It turned halfway. Then it stuck. It was the wrong cut. It was a dummy key. An insult disguised as a gesture. She wanted me to have the weight of it in my pocket, the symbol of access, without the actual power to enter. I didn't knock. I didn't ring the bell. I turned around and walked back to my car. The next morning, the letter arrived. It was delivered by a courier, requiring a signature. The return address was a law firm I didn't recognize. Halloway, Finch Associates, not my father's usual firm. I opened it at my kitchen table. The language was dense, formal legalese. Dear Ms. Long, we have been retained to execute the estate of the late Robert and Catherine Long. Please be advised that a reading of the last will and testament, as well as the opening of a supplemental trust instrument dated 25 years prior, will take place on Thursday at 10 in the morning. I read the sentence again. Supplemental trust instrument dated 25 years prior. I was 33. 25 years ago. I was 8 years old. My stomach dropped. A trust? My parents had never mentioned a trust. Elena had never mentioned a trust. And why a separate firm? Why a supplemental instrument? I looked around my small apartment. It suddenly felt very fragile. I felt the walls closing in. I needed an anchor. I needed something that felt real. I went to my closet and pulled down the shoebox from the top shelf. It was an old box for a pair of winter boots, taped at the corners. My mother had given it to me when I moved out. "Keep this," she had said. "Don't throw it away. Just keep it safe." I had never really looked inside. I assumed it was baby pictures. Maybe my baptism certificate. Sentimental clutter. I sat on the floor and opened the lid. Inside, there were dried flowers from a prom corsage, a ribbon from a spelling bee, and at the bottom, beneath a layer of tissue paper, was a single sheet of paper. It was a photocopy, grainy, black and white. It looked like the cover page of a legal document. Most of the text was redacted, blacked out with a thick marker, but one line in the center was circled in red ink. Beneficiary, S.L. Below it, in my mother's distinct, looping handwriting, was a note. "Do not let them rewrite history." I stared at the initials. S.L. Sadie Long. The date on the header of the document was visible. It matched the date in the lawyer's letter. 25 years ago. I ran my thumb over the red ink. It was my mother's pen. She had circled this for me. She had hidden this for me. "Do not sign anything," she had said. I closed the box. I stood up. The grief was still there, a heavy, dark ocean. But now, there was something else, a rudder. Elena thought I was weak. She thought I was the charity case, the distracted little sister who could be bought off with a fake key and a seat in the second row. She was wrong. I wasn't just a guest in this family. I was a beneficiary. And whatever was in that trust, whatever history they were trying to rewrite, I was going to read it first. I picked up the lawyer's letter and pinned it to my refrigerator. Let the reading begin. The law offices of Holloway, Finch, and Associates were located in a part of town that felt frozen in time. Unlike the glass and steel skyscrapers where my father's corporate attorneys operated, this firm occupied a converted brownstone on a quiet, tree-lined street. The air inside smelled of beeswax polish and old paper, a scent that suggested patience rather than speed. I arrived 15 minutes early. My hands were clammy, and I kept wiping them on my black dress pants. I expected to be kept waiting in the lobby, or perhaps told that the meeting had been rescheduled without my knowledge. That was the cadence of my life with the Long family. I was always the last to know, the one left standing on the curb. Instead, the receptionist, a woman with silver hair and kind eyes, looked up the moment I stepped through the door. "Ms. Long?" she asked. "Yes," I said, bracing myself for the dismissal. "I am Sadie Long. Please, come right this way," she said. "Mr. Holloway is expecting you." She didn't ask me to sit. She didn't ask me to wait for my sister. She led me straight down a hallway lined with oil portraits of severe-looking men and opened a heavy mahogany door. Inside, the office was vast, lined with books that looked like they had actually been read. Behind a massive desk sat a man who looked like he belonged to the furniture. He was elderly, perhaps in his late 70s, with a face etched with deep lines and a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles perched on his nose. He stood up immediately. "Ms. Long," he said, "I am Arthur Holloway. Thank you for coming." He extended a hand. I shook it, feeling the dry, papery texture of his skin. "My sister isn't here yet," I said. "Should we wait in the lobby?" "No," he said firmly. "You are the priority here. Ms. Long, please, have a seat. Before we begin, may I see your identification?" I blinked. "My identification?" "It is a formality," he said, "but a necessary one, a driver's license or passport." I dug into my purse and handed him my license. He studied it for a long time, comparing the photo to my face, then checking the birth date. He didn't just glance at it. He examined it like a jeweler inspecting a diamond. "Thank you," he said, sliding it back across the desk. "That confirms it." "Confirms what?" I asked. "That you are the person my client was concerned about protecting," he said. The phrasing hung in the air. "My client? Not your parents." Before I could ask what he meant, the door flew open. Elena breezed in, bringing a gust of expensive perfume and frantic energy with her. She was wearing a black dress that was tastefully mournful, but cut perfectly to show off her figure. She looked like a widow in a movie, tragic and glamorous. "I am so sorry," she said, breathless. "The traffic was a nightmare, and I had to deal with the florists for the grave site. You know how it is." She stopped when she saw me sitting in the leather chair opposite the desk. Her eyes narrowed. Just a fraction. "Oh," she said. "Sadie, you are here early. I was on time." I said. Elena turned her smile on Mr. Holloway. It was a dazzling, high-wattage smile that usually got her whatever she wanted. "Mr. Holloway, is it? I am Elena Long-Miller, the executrix. I assume you have the files ready? Sadie can wait outside while we go over the technical details. She gets overwhelmed easily." She gestured toward the door, a dismissal she had performed 1,000 times. "Adults are talking. Sadie, go play." "Mr. Holloway didn't smile back. He didn't even blink. "Mrs. Long-Miller, please have a seat," he said. "Mrs. Long will remain exactly where she is. She is an essential party to this meeting." Elena's smile faltered. "Excuse me? I am the executrix of the estate. I have power of attorney. You have power of attorney over the probate estate." "Mr. Holloway corrected. "That is correct. However, we are not here to discuss the probate estate. We are here to discuss the trust." Elena sat down slowly, smoothing her skirt. She looked at me, then back at the lawyer. "What trust?" she asked. "Daddy had all his trusts with Sterling and Kraft." "I have the binders. Your father had many accounts," Mr. Holloway said. "But this particular instrument was not established by your father. It was established 25 years ago by a third party, a trustee who is now deceased." He opened a thick file on his desk. The papers inside were yellowed at the edges. "This trust," he continued, "has been dormant for 2.5 decades. It was designed to activate only upon the death of both Robert and Catherine Long. It contains a sealed amendment." Elena laughed. It was a sharp, brittle sound. "This is ridiculous. A 25-year-old trust? It is probably some small savings account Grandma set up. Why are we wasting time on this?" "Because," Mr. Holloway said, his voice dropping an octave, "the assets in this trust are significant, and the beneficiary is quite specific." He turned the file around. Elena leaned forward. I stayed frozen in my chair. "I see," Elena said, her voice turning cold. "I see what this is." She looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Sadie," she said, "did you know about this?" I shook my head. "No." Elena turned back to the lawyer. "Look, Mr. Holloway, I am sure you are just doing your job, but there is a complication you are not aware of. Sadie isn't, technically, a Long." My heart hammered against my ribs. There it was, the weaponization of my existence. "She was adopted informally," Elena said, lowering her voice to a confidential whisper. "It was a private arrangement, very messy. My parents took her in to save her from the system, but the paperwork was never fully regularized. She has no standing as a legal heir." I stared at her. I had heard variations of this story my whole life. Jokes about being found in a basket, comments about how I didn't look like them. But hearing it stated as a legal fact was different. It was an eviction notice from my own history. "Mr. Holloway looked at Elena over the rim of his glasses. He didn't look surprised. "I am aware of the family history. Ms. Long-Miller," he said. "Then you know she can't be the beneficiary." Elena said, "If the trust says to my children or to the heirs of Robert Long, she doesn't count. I am the only natural heir." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The grief I had felt at the funeral was hardening into something cold and sharp, like a blade of ice. I looked at the lawyer. "Then why am I named on your paperwork?" I asked. My voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. Elena rolled her eyes. "You are probably listed as a dependent, a ward, Mr. Holloway ignored her. He looked directly at me, because, Mrs. Long, the grantor of this trust, anticipated this exact conversation. The beneficiary designation does not rely on your legal surname. It does not rely on your status as a natural heir." He tapped the yellowed paper with his index finger. "The trust identifies the beneficiary through 3 specific markers," he said. "First, the birth date, October 14th, 1992. That is my birthday," I said. "Second," he said, "a childhood nickname, Little Button. The air left my lungs. Button. My father used to call me that. Only him, and only when I was very, very small, before I was 10, before I became the charity case. I hadn't heard that name in 20 years. And third, Mr. Holloway said, a unique physical identifier known only to the parents and the child. A crescent-shaped scar on the left shoulder blade, resulting from a fall from a porch swing at age 4. I involuntarily reached back and touched my left shoulder. The scar was there. It was small, white, and jagged. I had never shown it to anyone. It was under my clothes. Elena went pale. She stared at the lawyer, her mouth slightly open. "Who wrote this?" she whispered. "Who knew that? That information is sealed until the amendment is fully executed." "Mr. Holloway said, "But let me be clear. The identity of the beneficiary is not in question. This trust was built to bypass probate. It was built to bypass the family name. It points directly to Sadie Long." Elena stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "This is absurd," she said. "I am contesting this. You are relying on 25-year-old gossip. I want to see the documents. You will receive copies in due time." "Mr. Holloway said calmly, "But for now, the process has begun. The assets are frozen pending the reading of the amendment." Elena looked at me. For the first time in my life, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Not annoyance, not superiority. Fear. "You did this," she hissed. "You manipulated them. You played the victim for 30 years just for this." I stood up. I was trembling, but I forced my legs to hold me. "I didn't know about the trust." "Elena," I said, "I just found out 5 minutes ago. Just like you." She grabbed her purse. "Don't think you are keeping it," she said. "Whatever it is, it belongs to the family, the real family." She stormed out. The heavy door slammed shut behind her, leaving a ringing silence in the room. "Mr. Holloway took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I apologize for the theatrics," he said. I looked at him. "Who was it?" I asked. "Who made the trust?" He looked at me with a sad, guarded expression. "It wasn't your parents. Sadie," he said. "It was someone who loved you very much, and someone who was very afraid for you." The pivot happened 3 days later. After the hostility at the lawyer's office, I expected war. I expected cease and desist letters, locked doors, maybe even a restraining order. Instead, I got a phone call from Aunt Martha. "Sadie." "Darling," she trilled. Her voice was dripping with a sugary sweetness that set my teeth on edge. "We were just so worried about you after the funeral. You looked so pale. We are having a small family dinner tonight. Just comfort food. We want you there." I hesitated. My mother's warning flashed in my mind. "If anything happens, don't sign anything your sister brings you." But this was Aunt Martha. She was the one who used to sneak me extra cookies at Christmas. She wasn't Elena, and a part of me, the part that was still a grieving daughter, the part that was desperate to not be an orphan, wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe that the ugliness in the lawyer's office was just grief talking. "I will be there," I said. I drove to Aunt Martha's house in the sprawling suburbs. The driveway was full of cars. Elena's Range Rover was there. Uncle Robert's sedan. I walked in, and the atmosphere was suffocating. It wasn't a dinner party. It was a tribunal. They were all seated around the dining room table, No food was served, just glasses of water and a stack of papers in the center of the table. "Sadie, come sit," Uncle Robert said. He gestured to the empty chair at the head of the table, not a place of honor, but the seat of the accused. I sat down. Elena was there, her eyes red-rimmed, playing the role of the devastated sister to perfection. "We have been talking," Aunt Martha said, folding her hands. "We are all just so heartbroken about your parents, and we are worried about how this legal confusion is tearing us apart." "It is not confusion," I said. "It is a trust." Uncle Robert sighed. He was a large man who used his physical size to intimidate. "Sadie, listen, we know you are hurt. We know you have always felt different. But this trust, it is a mistake, a clerical error from decades ago. If we let the lawyers fight it out, it will drain the entire estate. Nobody wins. The lawyers get everything." He slid the stack of papers toward me. "We have drawn up a family settlement agreement," he said. "It is very generous. It gives you a lump sum, enough to buy a condo, a nice car. You walk away with cash, tax-free. And we handle the complex assets. We keep the family business and properties intact, as your father intended." I looked at the papers, waiver of rights, renunciation of trust interest. "It is $50,000. Elena said softly. "That is more money than you have ever seen. Sadie, think of what you could do. You could go back to school. You could move. Start fresh." The implication was clear. Take the money and leave town. I looked around the table. My aunt, my uncle, my cousins, they were all watching me with the same expression, a mix of predatory focus and fake concern. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as a liability to be liquidated. I felt a wave of nausea. I hated confrontation. My hands were shaking in my lap. It would be so easy to sign, to take the check, to stop the fighting, to just be Sadie the charity. Case one last time, accept my severance package, and disappear. But then I thought of the shoebox. I thought of the circle in red ink. Do not let them rewrite history. I pushed the papers back. "No," I said. The room went deadly silent. "Sadie, be reasonable," Aunt Martha said, her voice sharpening. "I am being reasonable," I said. "I am waiting to hear what the trust actually says." "It says nothing," Elena snapped, dropping the act. "It is a ghost document. You are going to ruin everything because of some delusion that you are special? You are not special. Sadie, you are a mistake my parents were too polite to correct." The cruelty of it took my breath away, but strangely, it also steadied me. I stood up. "If it is a ghost document," I said, "then you have nothing to worry about. The court will throw it out. But if you are offering me $50,000 to go away, it means you think it is worth a lot more than that." I turned to leave. "If you walk out that door," Uncle Robert boomed, "you are on your own. No family support, no holidays. You are done." I paused at the doorway. I looked back at them. The tableau of the real family, united in their greed. "I have been on my own for 33 years. I said, "I just didn't realize it until tonight." I walked out. The war began the next morning. Elena didn't sue me immediately. That would be too direct. Instead, she destroyed my reputation. It started with a whisper campaign. I lived in a mid-sized town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Suddenly, I noticed the looks at the grocery store, the hushed conversations that stopped when I walked into the coffee shop. I heard the narrative from a friend of a friend. "Sadie is refusing to settle the estate. She is holding the family hostage for money. She is stealing from her grieving sister." Then the messages started. Facebook, Instagram, even text messages from numbers I didn't save. "How can you do this to Elena? Your parents would be ashamed of you. Greedy. Do the right thing." They were weaponizing morality. They were using my parents' memory as a bludgeon to beat me into submission. Every ping of my phone was a new accusation. I wanted to turn off my phone. I wanted to hide. But I knew that if I hid, they won. I needed to understand. I needed to know why they were so terrified. I decided to go back to the house. I still had the dummy key Elena had given me. But I also had something else. I knew where the spare key was hidden under the porch planter. My father had put it there 20 years ago. And knowing my family's arrogance, I bet they hadn't moved it. I drove over at noon on a Tuesday, when I knew Elena would be at her yoga class and Mark would be at work. I checked the planter. The rock was there. The key was there. I let myself in. The house was cold. The heat had been turned down to save money. It smelled of stale flowers and dust. I walked through the silent rooms. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just wanted to feel something, a connection. I went into my father's study. Something was wrong. The room looked tidy, but the geometry was off. The large oak bookshelf on the east wall was shifted about 3 inches to the left. The carpet indentation showed where it used to sit. I walked over to it. I pulled on the edge of the shelf. It was heavy, but it moved. Behind it, on the wall, was a patch of pale paint, cleaner than the rest. And in the center of that patch was a rectangular void, a wall safe. It was gone. Not just emptied, but ripped out of the wall. The drywall was jagged around the edges. I looked down at the floor. There was a faint dusting of plaster. Someone had been here, recently, in a hurry. They had removed the entire safe rather than trying to crack it. My heart raced. They were purging the house. They were sanitizing the past. I went to my mother's sewing room. Her desk drawers were open. Papers were shuffled. The photo albums that used to sit on the shelf were gone. They weren't just looking for financial documents. They were looking for me. They were looking for the evidence of the informal adoption. They were looking for the unique physical identifier. They were scrubbing my history from the house. I felt a sudden, primal panic. I needed to get my things, the few things that were undeniably mine. I ran to my old bedroom. It had been converted into a guest room years ago, but my closet still held some old boxes. I opened the closet door, empty. My high school yearbooks, my childhood trophies, the box of letters from my pen pal. All gone. They had erased me. I stood in the empty closet, the wire hangers jingling softly. I wasn't just a guest anymore. I was an intruder in a house that had been scrubbed of my existence. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Mr. Holloway. Sadie? His voice was urgent. I am here. I said, where are you? I am at the house. Get out, he said. Now. You shouldn't be there. If they find you there, they will claim you were stealing assets. Leave immediately. I am leaving. I said, backing out of the room. Mr. Holloway. The house. It has been tossed. The safe is gone. We will document that later, he said. Right now, we have a bigger problem. I hurried down the stairs, my heart pounding. I locked the door and put the key back under the rock. I got into my car and locked the doors. What is it? I asked. I just received a petition from your sister's legal team. He said, they are not just contesting the trust. What are they doing? They have filed a motion to freeze all distributions based on a question of identity. He said, they are claiming that Sadie Long is a legal fiction. They are requesting a court order for proof of heirship. What does that mean? I asked. He paused. It means they are demanding a DNA test. Sadie, they are going to try to prove that you are not biologically related to the Longs, and if they can prove that, they are going to argue that the trust definition of the beneficiary, using the nickname and the birth date, was based on a fraudulent premise. I gripped the steering wheel. Let them, I said. I know I am not their biological daughter. They have told me that my whole life. It is not about biology. Sadie, Mr. Holloway said, it is about the amendment. I can't open the sealed document until the court rules on your standing. They have bought themselves time, and they have made this public. Public? The filing is a matter of public record, he said. The local paper already has a reporter at the courthouse. They are going to turn this into a circus. The fake heiress. That is the narrative they are building. I looked at the house one last time. The curtains were drawn tight. It looked like a fortress. They want me to quit. I said, yes, he said. They want you to break. I thought about the empty closet. I thought about the missing safe. I thought of my mother's terrified whisper in the kitchen. Do not sign anything. She knew. She knew they would do this. Mr. Halloway, I said. Yes? Schedule the test, I said. Are you sure? It will be invasive. I don't care, I said. They want to prove who I am not. Fine. But I have a feeling that in the process, they are going to accidentally prove who I am. I hung up the phone. I put the car in gear. I wasn't Sadie the charity case anymore. I was Sadie the problem. And I was about to become their worst nightmare. The days following the confrontation at the attorney's office were defined by silence. It was not a peaceful silence. It was the heavy, pressurized quiet of a coastline waiting for a hurricane to make landfall. My sister, Elena, had retreated to her lawyer's war room, and I had retreated into the fragments of my own history. I started reconstructing myself. It is a strange thing to be 33 years old and realize you do not know the architecture of your own life. I sat on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by every scrap of paper I had managed to salvage before the locks were changed or the house was purged. I had my elementary school report cards, a few immunization records, and a stack of photos my mother had given me years ago for a collage project I never finished. I arranged them chronologically on the rug. There were gaps, massive, glaring voids in the timeline. I had no baby pictures before the age of 3. The narrative had always been that I was a late placement, a child who came to them after a difficult start. We didn't want to overwhelm you with cameras. My mother used to say, you were so shy. But looking at the records now, I saw something else. My first medical record with the family doctor was dated 3 months after my purported arrival. My kindergarten enrollment form listed my place of birth simply as state, with no city specified. The emergency contact line had been filled out in my father's handwriting, but then crossed out and rewritten in my mother's. They hadn't just adopted me, they had curated me. They had built a wall around my origins so high and so thick that even I couldn't see over it. I needed an outside perspective. I needed someone who had been there before the walls went up. I drove to the old neighborhood on a Wednesday afternoon. It was a street of mid-century brick houses where the trees had grown tall enough to touch across the road. I parked in front of a blue bungalow with a wheelchair ramp leading to the porch. Mrs. Gable lived there. She was 82 years old, the kind of woman who remembered every birthday and every scandal for 5 decades. She had been my mother's gardening partner when I was small. She answered the door in a floral housecoat, leaning heavily on a cane. Sadie Long, she said, her eyes crinkling. I heard about your parents. A terrible business. Come in, child. Her living room smelled of lavender and old dust. She poured me tea in a cup that rattled in its saucer. I wanted to ask you about when I was little. I said, I am trying to put together some memories for the memorial. Mrs. Gable nodded slowly. She took a sip of her tea, her gaze drifting to the window. You were a quiet thing, she said. Not like Elena. Elena was always performing. You were watchful. Do you remember when I first arrived? I asked. She frowned. It was a sudden thing. One day, Catherine, your mother, was complaining about the empty nest, even though Elena was only 10. The next week, there you were, a toddler with big, scared eyes. Did they say where I came from? She shook her head. They were very private about it. Catherine said it was a private arrangement, but... She trailed off, tapping her fingers on the arm of her chair. But what? I pressed. It was strange. Mrs. Gable said, you know how new mothers are. They want to show off the baby. They parade the stroller down the street. But Catherine? She used to walk you at night. At night? Late, Mrs. Gable said. After the sun went down, I used to see her from my bedroom window. She would push the stroller fast, looking over her shoulder. She kept the hood of the stroller up, even when it was warm. It didn't look like she was walking a child. Sadie, it looked like she was hiding evidence. A chill ran down my spine. Hiding evidence? She stopped doing it after a few months. Mrs. Gable added, once people got used to you being there, but for those first few weeks, She acted like she was afraid someone was going to come and snatch you away. I thanked her and left. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the house I'd grown up in down the street. It looked innocent in the afternoon sunlight, but I could imagine my mother, 25 years ago, pushing a stroller through the dark, terrified of being seen. Terrified of who? I went back to my apartment and dug through the box of cards I had saved. I found a birthday card from my father. I was 12 years old when he gave it to me. On the front, there was a picture of a sailboat. Inside, in his precise, architectural block lettering, he had written, "To Sadie, our anchor. You were ours before you knew you were ours, and you will be ours long after the world tries to say otherwise. Love, Dad." I had always read it as a sweet sentiment, a declaration of love. You belong with us, now. Reading it with the lawyer's revelations ringing in my ears, it sounded different. It sounded legal. You were ours before you knew. It sounded like a claim of ownership. A defense against a threat I hadn't known existed. Long after the world tries to say otherwise, he knew. He knew this day would come. He knew the world, or someone in it, would challenge my place in this family. The challenge arrived the next morning in the form of a courier packet from a law firm I didn't recognize. Vance. Sterling Holt. My sister had hired an attack dog. I opened the packet. It was a subpoena for my medical records, my employment history, and my tax returns for the last 10 years. But the centerpiece was a motion filed with the probate court. Motion to compel genetic testing to determine heirship. The cover letter was brutal. It accused me of fraudulent misrepresentation of familial status. It claimed that my presence in the Long family was a charitable custodial arrangement that I was now exploiting for financial gain. They were calling me a con artist. I called Mr. Holloway. Let them test me. I said. I was shaking with rage, but my voice was steady. Sadie, be careful. Mr. Holloway warned. This is a strategy. They want to humiliate you. They want you to refuse so they can paint you as having something to hide. I have nothing to hide. I said, I know I am not their biological child. The test will prove that. But it won't prove I am not the beneficiary of that trust. The trust uses my birthday and my scar. DNA doesn't change that. It might, he said, if they can prove you were obtained irregularly. They might argue the trust was fruit of a poisonous tree. I don't care. I said, I am done being afraid of the truth. Tell them I agree. Tell them I will do it tomorrow. We scheduled the test for 2 days later at an independent lab downtown. Elena was there. Of course. She brought her lawyer. Mr. Vance, a man with a suit that looked sharper than his intellect. Elena wouldn't look at me. She sat in the waiting room flipping through a magazine, her leg bouncing nervously. When the nurse called my name, I stood up. Elena looked up then, and for a second, I saw it again, the fear. She wasn't looking at me with triumph. She wasn't looking at me like a sister who was about to prove she was the only real heir. She looked terrified. Why? If she knew I wasn't along, the test was a slam dunk. It would confirm what she had been saying for weeks. Sadie is a charity case. Sadie is a stranger. Unless she was afraid the test would show something else. I did the swab. I watched the nurse seal the tube. I signed the chain of custody form. I will see you in court. Elena, I said as I walked out. She didn't answer. She just watched the vial in the nurse's hand as if it were a bomb. The next day, I went hunting for the money. If my family was willing to go to this length, to subpoena records, to drag my name through the mud, to risk a public scandal, it wasn't just about principle, it was about cash. I remembered a name from my time handling my father's busy work, Mr. Holloway. He wasn't the corporate accountant. He was a small-time CPA who operated out of a strip mall near the airport. My father used to send me to drop off sealed envelopes there. For the special accounts, he would say. I drove to the strip mall. Mr. Holloway was still there. He looked older, his office buried under stacks of files. He seemed surprised to see me, but he didn't kick me out. Sadie Long, he said, leaning back in his creaking chair. I wondered when you would show up. You knew about the trust? I asked. I know about a lot of things, he said. I know your father was a man who liked to keep his left hand from knowing what his right hand was doing. I need to know why my sister is so desperate. I said, They are burning down the house to get me out. Why? Mr. Soloway sighed. He took off his glasses and cleaned them on his tie. I can't give you the numbers. Sadie, client privilege. But I can tell you this. The long estate, the big house, the cars, the vacations. It was a shell. A shell? Smoke and mirrors, he said. For the last 10 years, your parents were living on liquidity provided by loans, high-interest loans. They were borrowing against the expectation of future value. What value? The inheritance, he said. Not yours, theirs. They were expecting a payout from a family holding that never materialized. They were drowning. Sadie. And Elena? She is on the hook, he said. She co-signed the refinancing on the lake house last year. If the estate is insolvent, and it is, the creditors are coming for her. She needs every penny from that trust just to stay out of bankruptcy court. The pieces clicked into place. Elena wasn't just greedy. She was cornered. But there was one thing that didn't make sense. If they were so broke, I said, why didn't my father tap the trust 25 years ago? The one with my name on it? Mr. Soloway looked at me. His expression was grave. He tried. He said, 5 years ago, when the market crashed, he tried to break the trust. He tried to argue that he, as the guardian, should have access to the principal, and the trustee blocked him. Mr. Soloway said, the trustee threatened to expose him. Expose him for what? Mr. Soloway shook his head. I don't know, but your father was terrified. He insisted the trust stay untouched, even when they were cutting coupons to buy groceries. He said it was blood money. Blood money. I left the office feeling sick. My parents had lived a lie. They had maintained a facade of wealth while drowning in debt, all while sitting on a fortune they couldn't touch because it belonged to the daughter they treated like a guest. I went home. I needed to find the source. I needed to find the voice of the trustee. I went back to the shoebox. I had emptied it before, or so I thought. But in my frenzy to find the document, I hadn't checked the construction of the box itself. I remembered something I had seen in a movie once. I turned the box over. I ran my fingers along the bottom cardboard panel. It felt thick, uneven. I took a kitchen knife and carefully sliced the tape holding the bottom layer. There, taped to the underside of the cardboard, was a key. It was small, brass, and flat, a safe deposit box key. The number 402 was stamped on the head, but there was no bank name. I turned the key over. On the back, in tiny letters, was an engraving. FNB, Maine, First National Bank, Maine Branch. I looked at the clock. It was 3 p.m. The bank closed at 5. I drove downtown like I was fleeing a crime scene. At the bank, I asked to access box 402. The clerk asked for my ID and the key. I held my breath. If the box was in my parents' name, I was locked out. The estate was frozen. The clerk typed into her computer. Okay, she said. You are on the authorized list. I am? Yes. The box is registered to an Elias Thorne. The name meant nothing to me. But, she continued, looking at the screen, there are 2 authorized deputies. One is a Sadie Long. I signed the card. My hand was trembling so hard I could barely form the letters. She led me into the vault. It was cool and silent. The walls lined with steel drawers. She unlocked box 402 and slid out the long metal container. I will give you some privacy, she said. I sat at the small table in the viewing room. I opened the lid. There was no money inside, no gold, no diamonds. There was a single thick envelope, sealed with wax that had cracked with age, and a deed. I picked up the deed first. It was for a property called Blackwood Creek. I scanned the legal description. It wasn't a mansion. It was a 20-acre parcel of land in the northern part of the state, unimproved, remote. Why would a trust worth millions be anchored to a patch of woods? I put the deed aside and picked up the envelope. On the front, in handwriting that was jagged and rushed, was my name. Sadie, I broke the seal. The letter was dated 25 years ago. The stationery was yellowed. Dear Sadie, if you are reading this, then Robert and Catherine are gone, and if they are gone, you are likely feeling very alone. You are likely feeling that you do not know who you are. My name was Elias Thorne. I was your father's friend, once, but more importantly, I was the one who carried you out of the fire. I stopped reading. The fire? You were not adopted. Sadie, you were hidden. There were people who wanted to use you. People who saw you as a bargaining chip in a war you were too young to understand. Robert and Catherine agreed to take you in, to give you a new name, to hide you in plain sight. They promised to love you, but I know people, and I know fear. I knew that one day, their fear might outweigh their love. I knew they might try to rewrite your history to save themselves. That is why I built this trust, to protect you from being erased. They will try to make you doubt yourself. They will tell you that you are lucky to be there. Do not believe them. You were never the charity case. You were the reason they were safe. You were the shield. The money in the trust is yours. But the real secret is the land at Blackwood Creek. Go there. Find the marker. It will tell you the rest. Do not let them win. Little button. Elias. I sat in the vault for an hour. The tears finally came. But they were hot, angry tears. You were the shield. My entire life, I had felt grateful. I had walked on eggshells, trying to be worthy of their kindness. Thank you for taking me in. Thank you for feeding me. And all the while, I was the leverage. I was the reason they were safe. From what? From whom? Elias didn't say, but he made it clear. My parents hadn't rescued me. They had detained me. They had kept me small. They had kept me quiet. They had used my competence to run their lives, and my existence to protect their secrets. And now, Elena was trying to finish the job. She wanted to erase me completely to cover her own debts. I wiped my face. The sadness was evaporating, burned away by a cold, hard anger. They wanted me to be useful? Fine, I would be useful. I would use the truth to tear their lies apart. I took the deed and the letter. I put them in my bag. I walked out of the bank. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the pavement. I wasn't going to hide anymore. I was going to Blackwood Creek. But first, I had to deal with the DNA test. 2 days later, the call came. It was Mr. Holloway. His voice was tight. Sadie, he said, the results are in. And? I asked. I was sitting at my kitchen table. The letter from Elias Thorne sitting in front of me like a talisman. I need you to come to the office, he said. Do not open the email notification if you get one. Why? Just come in. Sadie. I drove to the office. The receptionist didn't smile this time. She looked worried. Mr. Holloway was standing by the window. He turned when I entered. He held a file in his hand. We have a problem, he said. He slid the paper across the desk. I looked at the top page. Subject: Genetic Analysis Report. Case number 8990-L. I scanned down to the results section. I expected to see 0% probability of paternity. I expected to see the scientific confirmation of my adoption. Instead, in bold red letters, was a single word: inconclusive. And below it, a note from the lab director. Sample B, Sadie Long, shows signs of chemical degradation consistent with external contamination. Sample integrity compromised. Tampering suspected. I looked up at Mr. Holloway. Someone spiked my sample? I asked. Or they swapped it, he said. Or they heated it. Or they did something to ensure that no readable DNA could be extracted. But why? I asked. If they want to prove I am not along, why destroy the test? The test would have given them exactly what they wanted. Mr. Holloway took off his glasses. He looked tired. Unless, he said, the test wouldn't have given them what they wanted. What do you mean? Sadie, he said slowly. People don't tamper with DNA tests to hide a lack of relation. They tamper with them to hide a match. I stared at him. The room seemed to tilt. A match? If you were not related to them, the test would simply say, no match. That helps their case. The only reason to sabotage the test is if the result was going to show a biological connection they are desperate to hide. He leaned forward. The only reason to break the mirror is if you are terrified of the reflection. I looked back at the paper. Tampering suspected. Elena hadn't been afraid I was a stranger. She was afraid I was family, but not in the way anyone expected. I stood up. I grabbed the file. Order another test. I said, a court-supervised one. Chains of custody so tight they squeak. We will, Mr. Holloway said. But Sadie, watch your back. If they are willing to commit a felony to tamper with evidence, they are desperate. I am desperate too. I said, I walked out of the office. The anger was no longer a fire. It was a glacier, massive, unstoppable, and cold. I had the letter. I had the deed. And now I knew that my own body was a crime scene they were trying to scrub clean. I was going to find out who I was. And God help anyone who tried to stop me. The courtroom was a study in sterile intimidation. The fluorescent lights hummed with a low, headache-inducing frequency, and the air smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. I sat next to Mr. Holloway, keeping my hands folded on the table to stop them from shaking, across the aisle. Elena sat with her legal team, a phalanx of expensive suits designed to project invincibility, but the projection was cracking. The judge, a woman with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose and a patience that had clearly run dry, held the lab report in her hand. She didn't look at me. She looked directly at Elena's lead counsel. Mr. Vance, this is highly irregular, the judge said. Her voice was quiet, which made it terrifying. In 20 years on the bench, I have rarely seen a sample degrade so thoroughly without human intervention. It was an anomaly. Your Honor, Mr. Vance said, smoothing his tie. A lab error. My client is just as frustrated as the court. We want the truth to come out. Do you? The judge asked. She let the question hang there, heavy and suffocating. Elena shifted in her seat. She didn't look frustrated. She looked cornered. Her face was pale, her makeup applied with a heavy hand to cover the dark circles under her eyes. I am ordering a new test, the judge ruled, slamming her gavel with a decisive crack, and this time, it will be conducted by a court-appointed laboratory. The sample will be collected here, in the courthouse, under the supervision of the bailiff. There will be no courier services. There will be no private labs. Is that understood? Understood. Mr. Vance said. The judge turned her gaze to Elena and Mrs. Longmiller. Let me be clear. If there is any further anomaly with the evidence in this case, I will not hesitate to hold parties in contempt. We are determining heirship, not playing games. Elena nodded, her lips pressed into a thin white line. When we walked out into the hallway, the mask slipped back into place. Elena intercepted me near the water fountains. She moved fast, her heels clicking aggressively on the marble floor. Sadie, she said. I stopped. I didn't turn to face her fully. I kept my shoulder to her. A barrier. What do you want? Elena? She laughed. A breathless, high-pitched sound that didn't reach her eyes. You must be enjoying this, dragging the family name through the mud, making us look like criminals in front of a judge. I didn't tamper with the test. I said, How dare you? She hissed, stepping closer. How dare you accuse us? We took you in. We fed you. We gave you a home when nobody else wanted you. And this is how you repay us? By insinuating that I would sabotage a medical test? I looked at her. Really looked at her. Her hands were trembling. There was a sheen of sweat on her upper lip. She was talking too fast, throwing out defenses before the accusations had even landed. I didn't say you did it, Elena, I said calmly. The lab director did. Her eyes darted around the hallway, checking to see if anyone was listening. Then, just as quickly as the anger had flared, it vanished. Her face softened into a grotesque parody of sisterly concern. Look, Sadie, she said, lowering her voice. This is getting out of hand. The lawyers are the only ones winning here. They are bleeding the estate dry. Why don't we just talk? Without the suits. Just us. We can figure something out. I stared at her. 5 minutes ago, I was an ungrateful charity case. Now, I was a negotiation partner. We can talk after the results come back, I said. I turned and walked away. I could feel her eyes boring into my back, hot and desperate. She wasn't offended. She was terrified. The retaliation didn't take long. If the courtroom was the front line, the rest of my life became the guerrilla war zone. 2 days later, I was called into the HR office at work. I worked as a supply chain coordinator for a mid-sized logistics firm. It was a quiet job, one I was good at because I was good at details. I had never had a disciplinary infraction in 5 years. My boss, David, looked uncomfortable. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Sadie, please sit down," he said. He pushed a piece of paper across the desk. It was a printout of an email. The sender was anonymous, the address a string of random characters. To HR Department. Subject: Theft of company property. You should check the inventory logs for the last quarter. Your employee, Sadie Long, has been diverting shipments for personal resale. She is in severe financial debt and legal trouble. Do not trust her. I felt the blood drain from my face. "David, this is a lie," I said. "You know my logs. You sign off on them every week." "I know." "Sadie," he said, "and we ran an internal audit this morning. The numbers match. Nothing is missing." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "But," he continued, his face serious, "the accusation is serious. And the email mentions legal trouble. We did a background check. There are court filings, fraud accusations regarding an estate. It is a family dispute." I said, my voice rising, "My parents died. My sister is contesting the will." "That is all. I believe you," David said. "But corporate is nervous. We handle high-value goods. When we get tips like this, we have to be careful. We are not firing you, Sadie, but we are placing you on administrative leave for a week while we finalize the investigation. Suspended." I walked out of the building carrying a box of my personal items, feeling the stares of my coworkers burning into my neck. When I got home, there was a note taped to my apartment door. It was from my landlord. "Ms. Long, I received a call today regarding your solvency. As your lease is up for renewal next month, I am writing to inform you that we will require a secondary credit check and a 6-month security deposit if you wish to stay. They were attacking my stability. They were trying to cut the ground out from under my feet. No job, no home, no money. They wanted me panic-stricken. They wanted me desperate enough to take whatever scraps they threw at me." I sat on the floor of my living room, surrounded by the wreckage of my normal life. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call Elena and beg her to stop. Instead, I called Mr. Holloway. "They are trying to break me." I said, "Good," he replied. His voice was grim. "Good? It means they have no legal leg to stand on. Sadie, if they had a case, they would fight you in court. When people resort to anonymous emails and intimidation, it means they know they are going to lose on the merits. They are trying to force a settlement before the gavel falls. What do I do?" I asked. "You document everything," he said. "Every email, every voicemail, every note from your landlord. You are not a victim. Sadie, you are a witness. Build the file. We will use it to show a pattern of harassment." So I did. I bought a notebook. I started a log. Tuesday, 2 p.m. Suspended from work due to false anonymous tip. Wednesday, 10 a.m. Landlord demands excessive deposit based on tip. Writing it down changed something. It took the fear and turned it into data. I wasn't drowning anymore. I was building a case. I needed to understand the why. I knew they were greedy, but this level of coordination required more than just avarice. It required a specific, historical fear. I went back to the letter from Elias Thorne. "I was the one who carried you out of the fire." I searched for Elias Thorne online. He was a ghost. No social media, no recent address, just an obituary from 5 years ago, survived by his son, Julian Thorne. I found Julian. He ran a small architectural salvage business in the city. I sent him a message. My name is Sadie Long. Your father knew my parents. He left me a letter. He replied within an hour. Meet me at the Rail Yard Cafe. Noon. Julian Thorne was a man in his 40s, with sawdust on his jacket and hands that looked like they worked for a living. He had kind eyes, the same shade of gray as the winter sky. You look like him, he said when I sat down. Not your father. My dad. You have his intensity. You knew about the trust? I asked. I knew he had a secret. Julian said, he used to talk about the little girl in the glass house. He worried about you constantly. Why? I asked. Why did he care so much? Julian took a sip of his coffee. My dad wasn't just a friend of your parents. Sadie, he was their cleaner, not for crime scenes, but for messes, financial messes, personal messes. He fixed things. And what did he fix for them? He told me once that your parents were being blackmailed. Julian said. I froze. Blackmailed? Decades ago. Julian said. Around the time you appeared, someone had leverage on them. Someone knew something that could ruin them. My dad helped them set up a structure to pay it off without it looking like a payoff. The trust? No, Julian said. The trust wasn't the payoff. The trust was the shield. He thought that one day, the blackmailer would come back for more, or that your parents would sacrifice you to keep the secret buried. He created that trust to give you an exit strategy. He didn't give you money. Sadie, he gave you a getaway car. I sat back, my mind reeling. My parents weren't just protecting their reputation, they were protecting themselves from a threat. And I was the focal point of that threat. Did he say who it was? I asked. Who was blackmailing them? No. Julian said, he took that to the grave. But he said one thing that stuck with me. He said, the danger isn't that they don't love her. The danger is that they love their own skin more. The getaway car. I remembered the deed in the safe deposit box. Blackwood Creek. I had to see it. I drove out on a Saturday. The property was 2 hours north. In a part of the state where the suburbs dissolved into dense, pine-choked forest. The GPS led me down a dirt road that seemed to lead nowhere. I parked the car and walked. It wasn't a grand estate. It was 20 acres of wild, untouched land bordering a narrow creek. The trees were tall and old. The air smelled of pine needles and damp earth. I walked the perimeter, following the survey lines on the deed. In the center of the property, near the water, there was a small clearing. And in the middle of the clearing stood a single, weathered post. It was an old iron property marker, driven deep into the ground. I knelt beside it. Carved into the metal, crude and jagged, were initials, S.L., but it wasn't a professional engraving. It looked like it had been scratched there with a pocket knife, by a shaky hand. I ran my thumb over the letters, S.L. I imagined Elias Thorne standing here 25 years ago, or maybe my father. In a moment of rare courage, someone had marked this spot for me. This wasn't an investment. This wasn't a portfolio asset. This was a sanctuary. I stood up and looked around the quiet woods. For the first time since the funeral, the noise in my head stopped. The voices of my sister, the lawyers, the anonymous emails, they all faded against the silence of the trees. My family had spent 33 years telling me I was a guest, a footnote, a liability. But here, in the middle of nowhere, someone had carved my name into iron. Someone had decided that I deserved a piece of the earth that was mine and mine alone. I wasn't just real family. I was a person who had been loved fiercely enough to be hidden. I realized then that the anger I had been carrying wasn't just about the money, it was about the erasure. And looking at that marker, I knew I couldn't be erased. I was etched into the ground. When I got back to the city, the settlement offer was waiting. Elena had bypassed the lawyers. She had sent a courier to my apartment with a thick envelope. I opened it on my kitchen counter. It was a check, a cashier's check, certified funds, $500,000, $500,000. Attached was a document, confidentiality and release agreement. The terms were simple. I would cash the check. In exchange, I would renounce all claims to the trust. I would withdraw my petition for heirship, and I would sign a non-disclosure agreement that forbade me from ever discussing the Long family, the trust, or my origins with anyone, ever again. It was enough money to start over. I could move to Europe. I could buy a house. I could never work again if I was frugal. It was tempting. God, it was tempting. I was tired. I was suspended from my job. I was lonely. The idea of taking the money and vanishing into a quiet life felt like fresh water to a person dying of thirst. But why? Why $500,000? If I was a fraud, if I was a nobody, why pay me a fortune? You pay a nuisance $10,000 to go away. You pay a threat $500,000. I looked at the paperwork again. I looked at the signature line. And then I remembered something Mr. Soloway, the accountant, had said. Elena is on the hook. She co-signed the refinancing. I went to my box of salvaged documents. I found a copy of an old loan application my father had left on his desk years ago. I compared his signature to the one on the refinancing document Mr. Soloway had mentioned. I had managed to pull a copy from the public land records online the night I spoke to him. I laid them side by side. My father's signature was spiky, upright. The signature on the refinancing document, dated 6 months before he died, when his Parkinson's was so bad he could barely hold a spoon, was smooth, flowing. It looked exactly like Elena's handwriting. My breath hitched. She had forged it. She had forged our father's signature to get the loan that kept their lifestyle afloat. If the trust was opened, the estate would be audited, the assets would be scrutinized, the banks would see the discrepancy. This wasn't just about bankruptcy. This was bank fraud. This was federal prison. Elena wasn't paying me for the trust. She was paying me for her freedom. She was buying my silence because if I kept pushing, I wouldn't just take the money. I would expose the crime that had kept her in designer shoes for the last 5 years. I looked at the check. It sat there. A golden ticket. I could take it. I could let her get away with it. I could let them keep their secrets and their lies. And I could go be rich and anonymous somewhere else. I sat there for a long time. The sun went down. The apartment grew dark. I wanted peace. I wanted to grieve my parents without this war. I wanted to stop looking over my shoulder. I picked up the pen. I hovered it over the signature line. Just sign it. Just be free. Then my gaze drifted to the letter from Elias, still sitting on the counter. If you surrender, you will spend your whole life apologizing for existing. I put the pen down. If I took the money, I was agreeing with them. I was agreeing that I was a shameful secret that needed to be paid off. I was agreeing that my name didn't belong on the deed, that my history didn't matter. I would be rich, but I would be hollow. I picked up the check. I ripped it in half. Then I ripped the halves. I put the pieces in an envelope. I didn't write a note. I just addressed it to Elena. I wasn't going to apologize for existing. Not for $500,000. Not for anything. The end came on a Tuesday morning. I was in Mr. Holloway's office. It was raining outside, a gray, relentless drizzle that blurred the city skyline. Mr. Holloway came in holding a large, sealed envelope. The court seal was stamped across the flap in red ink. The independent results, he said. He sat down. He didn't open it immediately. Sadie, he said, whatever is in here, it is the truth. Are you ready for it? I am ready, I said. He sliced the envelope open. He pulled out the report. He read it in silence. His face remained impassive, but his eyebrows drew together. He read it again. Then he looked at me. Well? I asked. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. Am I a stranger? No, he said softly. You are not a stranger. He turned the paper around. Probability of paternity, 0%. Probability of maternity, 0%. I stared at it. So I was right. I said, I am not their child. Keep reading. Mr. Holloway said, look at the section on secondary kinship markers. I looked down. Analysis indicates a 99.9% probability of avuncular or half-sibling relationship to the testing reference profile, Robert Long. I frowned. Avuncular? Mr. Holloway leaned forward. Sadie, you are not Robert Long's daughter, but you are genetically related to him. The marker suggests you are his niece, or what? Or his grandchild. Mr. Holloway said, but given the ages, the niece theory fits the genetic distance better, or perhaps a child of a sibling he never acknowledged. I sat back, the room spinning. So I am family, I whispered. I am his blood. Just not his daughter. Yes, Mr. Holloway said, but there is something else. The lab ran a cross-reference against the regional database, as per the court order to exhaust all possibilities of identification. And? He tapped the bottom of the page. You share a significant genetic match with a profile that was flagged in the system 25 years ago. A missing persons case. A missing person? Mr. Holloway took off his glasses. His eyes were full of a strange, sad realization. Sadie. You weren't just adopted informally. You were taken, or hidden. You are biologically connected to the Longs. Yes, but this explains why your parents were terrified. I whispered the question, my voice barely audible in the quiet office. Of what? Mr. Holloway looked at me, and the weight of the truth seemed to fill the space between us. Of someone claiming you first. The courtroom had changed. In the beginning, it had felt like a place of judgment, a sterile chamber where my worth was being weighed against the heavy gold of the Long family legacy. But now, 3 weeks into the hearings, it felt more like an operating theater. We were cutting open the patient, my family's history, and the things we were finding inside were necrotic. After the DNA test proved I was related to the Longs, but not their daughter, and that my genetic sample matched a cold case profile from 25 years ago. The silence from Elena's side of the aisle had been deafening. For 2 days, they asked for continuances. They huddled in the hallways, their voices sharp and panicked. When we finally reconvened on a rainy Tuesday, their strategy had shifted. Elena's lawyer, Mr. Vance, stood up. He looked tired. The crispness of his suit seemed to have wilted under the humidity of the situation. Your Honor, he began, his voice smooth but lacking its initial bite. In light of the genetic revelations, we are amending our position. We no longer contest that Ms. Long has a biological connection to the family. However, we contest her capacity to administer or inherit the trust assets. The judge, who was currently reviewing a stack of motions, looked over her spectacles. On what grounds? Counselor? Undue influence. Mr. Vance said. He gestured toward me, not with disdain this time, but with a pity that made my skin crawl. It is our belief that Sadie Long is a vulnerable individual. She has been estranged from the family support system and has fallen under the sway of the Thorne family, specifically Julian Thorne, the son of the original trustee. We believe she is being manipulated into this litigation by a third party seeking to access the funds. Sadie isn't the villain here, Your Honor. She is a pawn. I sat froze. It was a brilliant, sickening pivot. If they couldn't paint me as a fraud, they would paint me as incompetent. They would pat me on the head, call me unstable, and take control of the money for my own good. I looked at Elena. She was dabbing her eyes with a tissue, playing the role of the concerned sister perfectly. She caught my eye and held it. There was no warmth there, just a cold, calculating assessment. Play along. Her eyes said, be the victim. It is easier, Mr. Holloway leaned over to me. Do not react, he whispered. This is the last gasp of a drowning swimmer. They are trying to invalidate your agency because they can't invalidate your identity. I kept my face blank. I stared straight ahead at the great seal of the state on the wall behind the judge. I wasn't a pawn. I was the only person in the room who was finally seeing the board. That afternoon, Mr. Holloway laid a new document on the table in the small conference room we used for strategy. We found it in the county archives. He said, it was misfiled under juvenile protection rather than probate. I looked at the photocopy. It was grainy. The text typed on a typewriter that had a sticky E key. Order of Emergency Guardianship. Date, November 12th, 1998. Subject, minor child. Female, approximately, age 6. Guardians, Robert and Catherine Long. I read the text. It wasn't an adoption decree. It was a protective order. Whereas the court has been presented with credible evidence of immediate threat to the safety of the minor child, whereas the biological parents are unavailable due to redacted. Custody is granted to the petitioners on an emergency basis, pending permanent resolution of status, emergency, threat. I ran my finger over the redacted line. They didn't adopt me because they wanted a second child, I said quietly. They took me because something bad was happening. Yes, Mr. Holloway said, and look at the addendum. He flipped the page. The petitioners agree to maintain the confidentiality of the minor's placement to ensure continued security. The minor's surname shall be amended to Long for administrative purposes and school enrollment, unrelated to legal adoption status. My name wasn't a gift. It was a disguise. This is why they always treated you like a guest. Mr. Holloway said, legally, you were a ward they were hiding. They never finalized the adoption because finalizing it would have created a public paper trail they were trying to avoid. I thought about Mrs. Gable, the neighbor. Your mom used to walk the stroller like she was hiding from someone. They were protecting me. I said. A wave of confusing emotion washed over me. Gratitude mixed with the old resentment. They were trying to keep me safe. Mr. Holloway looked at me, his expression grave. Maybe. He said, or maybe they were just following orders. What orders? He pulled out the bylaws of the trust, the document that was at the center of this entire war. I was reading the fine print of the amendment again last night. He said, the one Elena is trying so hard to keep sealed. There is a clause in Article 7. It is what we call a poison pill. He pointed to a paragraph buried in the middle of a page. In the event that the validity of this trust is contested by any family member of the guardians, or if the beneficiary's standing is challenged in a court of law, an immediate, full-spectrum external audit of all assets held by the guardians shall be triggered to ensure no commingling of trust funds with personal estate assets. I read it twice. The legalese was dense, but the meaning was clear. If Elena fights the trust, I said, she triggers an audit of the entire estate. Exactly. Mr. Holloway said, and not just a casual look-over, a forensic audit, going back 25 years. I closed my eyes. The loans, the forgery. If the auditors look at the estate accounts, I said, they will find the refinanced loan. They will find the signature Elena forged. Mr. Holloway nodded. She isn't just fighting for the money. Sadie. She is fighting to keep the lid on the box. If she loses this case, or even if she just drags it out long enough for the clause to trigger, she goes to prison for bank fraud. It was a trap. Elias Thorne, the man who wrote this trust, had anticipated everything. He knew my parents, or their children, might get greedy. He knew they might try to cut me out. So he wired the money with a tripwire, touch the girl, and you blow up the house. Does Elena know? I asked. She must suspect it. Mr. Holloway said, that is why she is panicked. That is why she offered you $500,000 to walk away. She is trying to disarm the bomb before it goes off. I needed to look one of them in the eye, not Elena. She was too far gone in her own desperation. I needed someone who had been there at the beginning, someone who had watched the architecture of this lie be built. I called Uncle Robert. He agreed to meet me. Surprisingly, we met at a diner near the highway, a neutral place where the noise of clattering plates provided cover. He looked older than he had at the funeral. The arrogance was still there, but it was brittle now, like dried clay. What do you want? Sadie? He asked, not touching his coffee. You have already humiliated us. The whole town is talking. I am not trying to humiliate anyone, I said calmly. I just want the truth. He scoffed. The truth? You think you want the truth, but you don't. You are opening doors that were nailed shut for a reason. Tell me about the guardianship. I said. He flinched, just a small tick in his jaw. I don't know what you are talking about. I have the court order. Robert, I know I wasn't adopted. I was placed. I know there was a threat. He looked out the window at the parking lot. He seemed to deflate. You were a liability. Sadie, he said, His voice was low, almost a whisper. From the day you arrived, you were a risk. Why? I asked. Because I wasn't real family? No, he snapped, turning back to me. His eyes were wide, fearful, because of who you belong to. He leaned across the table. Your father. My brother. He was a good man, but he was weak. He got involved in things he shouldn't have. He owed favors, and when they asked him to take you in, he couldn't say no. Who asked him? I don't know names, Robert said. We were never told names. We were just told that you had to disappear, that you had to become Sadie Long, and we were told that if we ever tried to claim you fully, if we ever made you a legal heir, if we ever put your name on a title, the people looking for you would find you. He took a shaking breath. We were told that if you were acknowledged, the real family would come back, and they wouldn't just take you. Sadie, they would take everything. They would strip the Long family down to the studs. I stared at him. The cruelty of my childhood suddenly reframed itself. So you minimized me to save your money. I said, we minimized you to survive, he hissed. We treated you like a guest because if we treated you like a daughter, we put a target on our backs. We were terrified of you. Sadie, every time you laughed, every time you asked a question about where you came from, we held our breath. He wiped his mouth with a napkin. And now, you are doing exactly what we feared. You are shouting your name from the rooftops. You are drawing them in. Who? I asked again. Who is coming? Robert stood up. He threw a $20 bill on the table. I don't know, he said, and I don't want to be around when they get here. Stop this. Sadie, take the settlement. Go away. Before you wake up something you can't put back to sleep. He walked out. I sat there, watching the waitress pour coffee for a trucker in the next booth. It wasn't just prejudice. It was fear. They had treated me like a liability because I was one. I was a walking, talking breach of contract with some invisible, terrifying power. I went to Julian Thorne's salvage yard that evening. It was a cavernous warehouse filled with old mantelpieces, copper bathtubs, and stained glass windows, the debris of demolished lives. Julian was in the back office, surrounded by stacks of old ledgers. I spoke to my uncle. I said, he told me they were afraid of my real family. He said they were afraid someone would come back. Julian nodded. He didn't look surprised. I found something too. He said, he opened a leather-bound book on his desk. It was his father's journal. My dad was meticulous. Julian said, he kept records of everything. I found an entry from 10 years ago. He pointed to the page. August 4th. Attempted breach of the trust. A lawyer representing a Marcus Sterling made inquiries. Claimed to have proof of prior rights to the beneficiary. I stonewalled him, told him the trust was impenetrable. He threatened litigation, then went silent. He vanished. Marcus Sterling. The name meant nothing to me, but the date, 10 years ago, aligned with when my father had tried to access the trust money and failed. So this Marcus Sterling tried to get the money, I asked. No, Julian said. He wasn't after the money. Read the next line. I leaned in. The claimant does not want the assets. The claimant wants the custodial rights. He wants the girl. I told him she is safe. He told me safety is a matter of perspective. A chill went through me that had nothing to do with the drafty warehouse. He wanted me. I was 23 years old 10 years ago. I was an adult. It wasn't about custody in the legal sense. Julian said, it was about ownership. My dad stopped him. That is why the trust stayed locked. That is why your parents were terrified. This isn't just a bank account. Sadie, it is a bunker, and by opening it, you are opening the door. 2 days later, the hearing resumed. Elena looked ragged. The stress was eating her alive. Her lawyer, Mr. Vance, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. They submitted a new piece of evidence. It was a Hail Mary pass. Your Honor, Mr. Vance said, to demonstrate that the guardianship was never intended to be permanent, we are submitting this affidavit signed by the late Robert Long, dated 1 year before his death. In it, He explicitly states that Sadie Long was a temporary ward and that no inheritance was intended. He handed the document to the bailiff. "Mr. Holloway took our copy." He scanned it. Then he froze. He leaned over to me. "Look at the date," he whispered. I looked. September 10th. Then he pointed to the notary stamp at the bottom. Commission expires May 2018. I did the math. If the document was signed in September of the year before my father died, the notary commission should have been valid then, but the stamp date was wrong. The commission expiration date on the stamp was before the document was supposedly signed. Mr. Holloway stood up. "Your Honor," he said, his voice ringing out in the quiet courtroom. "We object to the admission of this document." "On what grounds?" the judge asked. "On the grounds that it is a forgery." "Your Honor." A gasp went through the room. Elena went white. "Mr. Holloway walked to the bench. "The notary stamp on this affidavit expired 6 months before the document was allegedly signed," he said. "Unless the notary was traveling through time, this document was created retroactively, and poorly." The judge took the paper. She pulled a magnifying glass from her drawer. She studied the stamp. She studied the signature. She looked up. Her face was no longer neutral. It was thunderous. "Ms. Longmiller," she said. "Stand up." Elena stood up. Her legs were shaking so badly she had to grip the table. "Did you submit this document?" the judge asked. My lawyer," Elena stammered. "Did you provide this document to your counsel?" Elena looked at Mr. Vance. He stepped away from her. A subtle physical distance that signaled, "I am not going down with this ship. I found it in my father's files," Elena whispered. The judge stared at her. "You are lying to this court, Ms. Longmiller, and you are doing a very bad job of it." The energy in the room shifted instantly. It wasn't a civil dispute anymore. It was a death spiral. I watched Elena. I should have felt triumphant. This was the moment of victory. She had overplayed her hand. She had panicked and tried to manufacture evidence, and she had been caught. But I didn't feel triumph. I felt sick. I watched her disintegrate, her face crumpling as she realized she had just handed the judge the hammer to destroy her. She looked small. She looked like a frightened child trying to fix a broken vase with glue before her parents came home. "I am ordering the original document be surrendered for forensic analysis," the judge said, "and I am placing the estate under immediate temporary receivership. Ms. Longmiller, you are removed as executrix effective immediately." Elena sank back into her chair. She put her head in her hands. I looked away. It was ugly. It was necessary, but it was ugly. That night, the insomnia was brutal. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the sound of the judge's gavel. I had won the battle. Elena was removed. The trust would likely be opened at the next hearing. But the victory felt hollow. I had torn down the only family structure I had ever known. Yes, it was a structure built on lies and exclusion. But it was my structure. I was the one holding the wrecking ball. I thought about Uncle Robert's warning, "You are opening doors that were nailed shut." My phone rang. It was sitting on the nightstand. The screen lit up the dark room. Unknown caller. I hesitated. Then I picked it up. "Hello?" There was a pause. No static, just a clean, clear silence. Then a voice. It was male, calm, and cultured. It didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a statement of fact. "You were never supposed to find that trust." "Sadie?" My heart slammed against my ribs. "Who is this?" I asked. "Stop," the voice said. "Just stop, while you still can." The line went dead. I sat up, clutching the phone. The voice hadn't been angry. It hadn't been shouting. It was the voice of someone who was completely in control. Someone who was watching a child play with a loaded gun and was asking them to put it down before they hurt themselves. Stop. It was more chilling than any scream. I called Mr. Holloway. It was 2 a.m. He answered on the second ring. I got a call. I said, my voice was shaking, "What did they say?" They told me to stop. They said I wasn't supposed to find the trust. "Sadie," he said, "listen to me. Lock your doors." "They are locked." I said, Mr. Holloway, maybe I should stop. Maybe Uncle Robert was right. Maybe I am waking up something dangerous. Sadie, he said firmly, they are calling you because they are losing. Fear is their last weapon. But I am afraid. I whispered. I feel guilty. I am destroying Elena. I am destroying the family name. They started the war. Sadie, he said, they erased you. They lied to you. They stole from you. You aren't destroying the family. You are just refusing to disappear. And that is the one thing they cannot tolerate. You are refusing to disappear. I hung up. I went to the window. I looked out at the streetlights reflecting on the wet pavement. I wasn't going to disappear. The final hearing was scheduled for Friday. The courtroom was packed. The local press had picked up the story. Prominent family and inheritance scandal. Strangers were in the gallery. The judge took the bench. She looked at the sealed envelope that sat on her desk. The amendment. We are here to execute the supplemental instrument of the trust, she said. The challenges to the beneficiary's standing have been dismissed with prejudice. Elena wasn't at the defendant's table. She was sitting in the back row, wearing sunglasses, looking like a ghost. Her lawyer was there, silent and defeated. The judge picked up the letter opener. The sound of the paper tearing seemed to echo in the room. She unfolded the document. She read it to herself first. Her expression changed. She looked surprised. Then she looked at me. The document is valid, she announced, and it is specific. She began to read aloud. I, Elias Thorne, acting as trustee, hereby designate the primary beneficiary of the Blackwood Trust to be the individual known as Sadie Long. She continued through the legal descriptions, and then she reached the assets. The trust assets include the deed to the Blackwood Creek property, and then the twist. And the controlling majority share of the Sterling Long Holding Company, which holds the title to the primary residence at 14 Elm Street, the vacation property at Lake Mirror, and the intellectual property rights of the Long Family Foundation. The room went silent. The trust didn't just have money in it. It owned the house. It owned the lake house. It owned the business. Elena had never owned any of it. My parents had never owned any of it. The trust had owned it all along. They had been living in my house. They had been vacationing at my lake. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just protecting the money from me. They were terrified because I was the landlord. I had held the keys to their entire existence for 25 years, and I didn't even know it. The judge continued. The trustee notes that these assets are held in constructive trust for the beneficiary to prevent their seizure by external claimants, specifically the entity known as the Sterling Group. Sterling. There was that name again. I walked out of the courthouse in a daze. The reporters were shouting questions, but I didn't hear them. Mr. Holloway was guiding me by the elbow. We won. Sadie, he was saying, you own it all. They can't evict you. You can evict them. I stopped on the courthouse steps. The sun was breaking through the clouds. I looked across the street. There was a black sedan parked at the curb. A man was standing next to it. He was wearing a long wool coat. He wasn't looking at the reporters. He was looking at me. He was too far away for me to see his face clearly. But I saw the way he stood. Still, watchful. He raised a hand, not in a wave, but in a gesture of acknowledgement. A salute. Then he got into the car. The car pulled away, merging seamlessly into the traffic. I felt a cold shiver go down my spine. Despite the sunlight, the voicemail, the warning, you were never supposed to find that trust. I turned to Mr. Holloway. Did you see that car? I asked. What car? He asked. Looking around, the black sedan, the man. Sadie, it is a busy street, he said gently. You are exhausted. Let's get you home. I looked back at the empty spot at the curb. I wasn't exhausted. I was wide awake. I had won the battle for the Long family estate. I had proven who I was. But as I watched the taillights of the black sedan disappear, I realized the terrifying truth. The Longs were just the gatekeepers. I had just unlocked the gate, and now, the real owner was coming. The morning of the final hearing, the air in the courtroom felt brittle, as if the slightest noise might shatter the windows. It was no longer just a legal proceeding, it had become a spectacle. The wooden benches were packed shoulder to shoulder with people. I saw faces from my childhood, neighbors who had whispered about the charity case over their garden fences, and distant cousins who had never sent a birthday card but were suddenly deeply invested in the family lineage. I sat alone at the plaintiff's table. Mr. Halloway was reviewing his notes, his face a mask of professional calm, but I could feel the eyes of the room on the back of my neck. They were judging me. They were weighing my worth. Was I the greedy interloper stealing from the grieving sister? Or was I the victim finally standing up? I reached into my pocket and touched the folded letter from Elias Thorne. You were the shield. He had written, "Do not let them win." The paper was warm against my fingertips. It grounded me. I wasn't here for their approval. I was here for the truth. All rise, the bailiff bellowed. Judge Eleanor Vance swept into the room, her black robes rustling like the wings of a crow. She took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and looked out over the packed courtroom. We are here to conclude the matter of the Long Family Trust, she said. The supplemental amendment, which has been sealed for 25 years, will now be executed and read into the record. Elena was sitting 2 tables away. She looked diminished. The vibrant, sharp-edged woman who had tried to lock me out of my parents' house was gone. In her place was someone pale and trembling, her hands gripping her purse as if it were a lifeline. The court clerk handed the judge the document. It was the original, the paper yellowed with age, the wax seal broken. The judge cleared her throat. This amendment serves as the governing instrument for the distribution of all assets held within the Blackwood Trust. She read, "It supersedes all prior wills and testaments regarding the specific assets listed herein." She paused, looking directly at Elena, then at me. I, Elias Thorne, trustee, acting in accordance with the wishes of the grantor, hereby name the sole and primary beneficiary of the trust as the individual known as Sadie Long. This designation is absolute and irrevocable. A ripple of sound went through the courtroom, a collective intake of breath. Elena closed her eyes. The judge continued, "The beneficiary is designated not by bloodline, but by protective necessity. The assets contained in this trust are to be held for her exclusive benefit. To ensure her security and independence from any external or internal threats, protective necessity." The phrase hung in the air. And now, the assets, the judge said. This was the part everyone was waiting for. The money, the millions. The trust holds the entirety of the shares of the Phoenix Holding Group. The judge read, "This entity holds the fee simple title to the residential property located at 14 Elm Street, the vacation property at Lake Mirror, and all liquidity in the primary family investment accounts." The silence in the room was absolute. It took a moment for the reality to sink in. The trust didn't just have money in it. The trust was the money. It was the house. It was the land. Elena let out a small, strangled sound. My parents hadn't owned the house. They hadn't owned the lake cabin. They hadn't owned the investments. For 25 years. They had been living in a house owned by a trust that belonged to me. They were tenants. I was the landlord. The irony was so sharp it almost drew blood. They had treated me like a guest in my own home. They had changed the locks to keep me out of a property that I had owned since I was 8 years old. "There is an addendum," the judge said. A personal statement from Mrs. Catherine Long, included as a condition of the trust's activation. She adjusted the paper. "My dear Sadie," the judge read, her voice softening slightly, "if you are reading this, I am gone, and I am sorry. I know you felt the distance. I know you felt the coldness. Please understand that we allowed the family to believe you were not real, because it was the only way to keep you safe. If the world thought you were nothing to us, then the people looking for you would think you were nothing to them. We minimized you to hide you. I hope one day you can forgive us for the lie that kept you alive." I felt a tear slide down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of relief. It was a tear of grief for the little girl who had cried herself to sleep, wondering why she wasn't good enough. It wasn't that they didn't love me. It was that their love was terrified. They had built a fortress of indifference to hide me from a monster I couldn't see. But the moment of emotional clarity was shattered by a scream. "It is a lie." Elena was standing up. Her chair clattered backward. Her face was twisted, red and wet with tears. "It is a lie," she shrieked, pointing at me. "She isn't the heir. She is a stray. My parents were afraid of her. They were afraid of the people she came from." "Ms. Longmiller, sit down," the judge barked. "I won't sit down," Elena yelled. Her composure had fractured completely. She wasn't the grieving sister anymore. She was a desperate animal caught in a trap. I did everything for this family. I managed the accounts. I took care of them when they were sick. I forged the papers to keep the house. I did it to save us. The courtroom gasped. Mr. Vance, Elena's lawyer, put his head in his hands. The judge stared at Elena. "You did what, Ms. Longmiller?" Elena stopped, realizing what she had just said. She looked around the room, her eyes wide and wild. I had to. The loans. The bank was going to take everything. I signed Dad's name. I had to keep the house. It was for the family." She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "I did it for us. Sadie, you can't take it all. If you take the trust, the audit happens. They will see the signature. They will send me to jail. Please, you can't let them do that." I looked at her. I saw the terror. I saw the selfishness. She hadn't forged the signature to save the family. She had forged it to save her lifestyle. She had risked federal prison to keep up appearances, and now she wanted me to cover for her. The judge turned to the bailiff. "Please escort Ms. Longmiller to the bench," she said coldly, "and I am ordering an immediate referral to the district attorney's office regarding the admission of forgery and fraud." Elena began to sob as the bailiff approached her. It wasn't a dignified weeping. It was the ugly, heaving sobbing of someone whose world has ended. "Sadie Long," the judge said, "please take the stand." I stood up. My legs felt heavy. But I walked to the witness box. I placed my hand on the Bible. I swore to tell the truth. "Ms. Long," the judge said, "you have heard the reading of the trust. You have heard your sister's outburst. Do you have anything to say regarding the disposition of the assets?" I looked out at the courtroom. I saw the faces of the relatives who had shunned me. I saw the neighbors who had gossiped. I saw Elena, slumped in a chair, weeping into her hands. I could have destroyed them. I could have unleashed a torrent of rage about the birthday parties I wasn't invited to, the family photos I was cropped out of, the spare key that didn't work. I could have been the avenging angel, but looking at them, I didn't feel rage. I felt pity. They were so small. Their entire world was built on the fear of losing things: money, status, houses. They had spent their lives building walls, and I had spent mine learning how to climb them. I didn't ask for this fight. "Your Honor," I said. My voice was quiet, but the microphone carried it to every corner of the room. I didn't ask for the money. I just wanted to know who I was. I looked at Elena. "My sister says I am not real family." I continued. "And she is right. Real family doesn't treat a child like a liability. Real family doesn't erase you to save themselves. For 33 years. I was told I was lucky to be a guest in that house, but today, I learned that I was never the guest. I was the reason the house was standing. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the ventilation system. "I don't want revenge," I said. "I just want what is mine, and I want the truth to be on the record. I am not a charity case. I am the heir." I stepped down. The judge nodded. She looked down at her notes. "The court finds in favor of the plaintiff." She ruled, "Sadie Long is the sole beneficiary of the Blackwood Trust. The assets are to be transferred immediately. The temporary receivership is dissolved." Elena's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, we request a recess to discuss settlement terms regarding the fraud allegations." "Denied," the judge said, slamming the gavel. "This hearing is adjourned. The fraud investigation is now a criminal matter. Good day." The sound of the gavel was like a gunshot. It was over. "Mr. Holloway turned to me and smiled. A genuine, relieved smile. You did it. Sadie, he said. I looked over at Elena. She was being led out a side door by 2 officers. She looked back at me one last time. Her eyes were empty. She wasn't angry anymore. She was just broken. I walked out of the courtroom. The hallway was chaotic, but I felt a strange sense of calm. Mr. Holloway walked with me. There is one more thing, he said. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a small, sealed envelope. The judge didn't read this part aloud. He said, it wasn't part of the legal disposition. It was referenced in the footnotes as Exhibit C. It is a letter from your father. My father? It was never sent. Mr. Holloway said, Julian Thorne gave it to me this morning. His father kept it in the safe with the trust documents. I took the envelope. It was addressed to Sadie. I walked outside. The sun was blinding. I found a quiet bench away from the cameras and sat down. I opened the letter. My dearest Sadie, if you are reading this, I have failed. I promised myself I would tell you the truth before I died, but I am a coward. I have always been a coward. We didn't take you in because we were saints. We took you in because we were compromised. The man who claims you, the man we hide you from, he isn't just a threat. He is your blood. He is the one who named you Sadie before you ever came to us. I feared that if you knew the truth, that we were your jailers as much as your parents, you would hate us. I feared that you would leave, and selfishly, I couldn't bear that. You were the only good thing in a life full of compromises. The trust is your freedom. But be careful. The man who wants you is still out there. And he doesn't forget. Forgive me. Ed, I lowered the letter. The man who claims you, he is your blood. I thought about the black sedan. I thought about the man in the wool coat who had saluted me. I wasn't just an orphan. I was a prize in a war I didn't understand. My parents had hidden me not just to save me, but to keep me from him. The victory felt different now. I had won the house. I had won the money. I had defeated my sister. But I had also stepped out of the shadows and into the light where he could see me. I stood up. I looked at the city skyline. I was Sadie Long. I was the heir. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the monsters. Let them come. I owned the fortress now. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Sadie Long and her fight for the truth. I'd love to know where you are listening from. Please drop a comment below and tell me your country or city. And if you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories for more tales of justice, secrets, and family drama. Don't forget to share your thoughts on the ending. Do you think Sadie made the right choice? See you in the next story.